starving children with haunting eyes and emaciated bodies, Bombedout hospitals and homes. A cholera epidemic that is the largest and fastest spreading in modern history. These scenes have sparked outrage and a flurry of denunciations of the U.S.backed war in Yemen, which is led by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But that's not to say the war has no defenders in the United States. In fact, a public relations consultant and former U.S. diplomat enlisted by the UAE has worked to discredit U.S.based groups raising awareness of atrocities in Yemen. Hagar Chemali previously served as a top spokesperson for Samantha, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Now, she is paid six figures to shape the debate about the war at the UN, including by discrediting NGOs that advance evidence of human rights violations in Yemen, according to public disclosures and emails obtained by The Intercept. Saudi Arabia and the UAE launched a military intervention in March 2015 against the Houthi rebels, who are allied with former Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh and backed by Iran. The Saudi-led coalition, which aims to reinstate ousted President Abdurabu Mansur Hadi, blockaded the country and has indiscriminately bombed civilian centers such as markets, hospitals, and children's schools. Last week, Power weighed in on the conflict, condemning American support for the coalition. But during her time at the UN, Power maintained a code of silence on what U.S. allies were doing in Yemen. She is now criticizing a Trump administration policy that is largely a continuation of her former boss approach. Now, Chemali, who was Power's spokesperson at the time the Saudi war on Yemen began, is working to undermine criticisms of the war. At the UN, Chemali played an influential role, coordinating all communications and overseeing public diplomacy for the U.S. mission, the UN's largest financial contributor. She had previously worked as the director for Syria and Lebanon on Obama's National Security Council and as a spokesperson on terrorist financing at the Treasury Department. Shortly after leaving the UN in early 2016, Chemali set up a one-person consulting firm called Greenwich Media Strategies. In September of that year, she registered to work for the UAE Embassy as a foreign agent, a legal designation under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA. That means she is paid to represent a foreign government. In her current role, Chemali has reached out to journalists who cover the UN to undermine messaging from human rights groups critical of the war in Yemen. In one email from November 2016 obtained by The Intercept, Chemali laid out a strategy to discredit the work of a newly formed group called the Arabian Rights Watch Association, which had begun testifying before the UN Human Rights Council earlier that year. The Intercept obtained emails between Chemali and Yusuf Al-Taiba, the UAE's influential ambassador to the United States, from a group that refers to itself as Global Leaks, which earlier this year began distributing emails from Al-Taiba's Hotmail inbox, which he used for professional correspondence, to media outlets, including The Intercept, The Daily Beast, Al Jazeera, and The Huffington Post. URWA is a small group of Yemeni lawyers and activists based in the United States. The organization began filing complaints with the UN Human Rights Council in early 2016, calling for an end to the blockade and for a UN investigation into all the parties in the war for violations. The organization's work began to gain traction that summer, when a group of UN experts started to investigate the blockade as a mass human rights violation. In April 2017, a UN human rights expert identified the blockade as a primary cause of the humanitarian crisis and called on the coalition to lift the siege. When the UAE government noticed the efforts of NGOs like URWA, it quickly tried to delegitimize them. In August 2016, Anwar Gargash, UAE Minister for Foreign Affairs, accused human rights groups of being front groups for the Houthis. The Houthi rebel staff has turned into human rights activists and advocates of democracy, through a network of fake human rights organizations, Gargash said on Twitter, according to the Emirati newspaper Al Ittihad. It didn't take long for think tanks in Washington to adopt the same narrative. In October 2016, Michael Rubin, a scholar at the neoconservative American Enterprise Institute, wrote that URWA was a Houthi front and part of a campaign to whitewash the Iranian and Hezbollah occupation of the Houthis. Rubin has also frequently attacked the credibility of more prominent human rights organizations, such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. Mohammed Al-Wazir, the legal affairs director at URWA, strongly disputed Rubin's accusation, in noting that URWA has been critical of both the coalition and the Houthis. URWA has consistently called for a credible independent investigation into all alleged violations, abuses and crimes committed in Yemen by all parties to the conflict, Al-Wazir told The Intercept in an email. That includes both the de facto authorities and the members of the coalition. El-Wazir also said that URWA has taken more direct efforts to criticize the Houthis, including by sending letters to Houthi authorities demanding due process for their political prisoners. Regardless, Rubin's proclamation was a godsend for the UAE public relations machine, which moved quickly to circulate what he had written. In early November, Chemly wrote an email titled "Rehow the Infiltration of the UN, Media Reporting" and sent it to Otaiba and Lana Nussaiba, the UAE's ambassador to the UN. "I've attached proposed next steps to follow up on the AEI pieces to help bring attention to them and help land a larger piece in main press," wrote Chemly. The Intercept also obtained a copy of the email attachment, a document titled "Follow Up on AEI Pieces" that contains metadata identifying Chemly as its author. In it, Chemly laid out her plan to quietly circulate Rubin's accusation throughout the UN. She suggested that Nussaiba reach out to ambassadors from other coalition countries and said that she would flag the piece for UN correspondents and other relevant national security reporters and think tankers. These steps take into consideration the need to proceed, carry and build attention to these pieces through ways that don't appear too aggressive or loud and without UAE fingerprints, Chemly wrote. Chemly's firm subsequently reached out to UN reporters at the Associated Press, New York Times, Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, CBS, and Reuters, according to Justice Department disclosures filed in 2017. During the one-year period after Chemly registered as a foreign agent, the UAE paid her company more than $103,000 for the work on behalf of the Gulf monarchy. Her firm was not paid by the UAE directly. Instead, the money came from Harbour Group, a D.C.-based communications firm Otaiba has on permanent retainer, according to Justice Department disclosures. According to the Harbour Group's filings with the Justice Department, the UAE pays the firm, which has 7 registered foreign agents on staff, $80,000 a month for its work. Chemly did not respond to repeated requests for comment from The Intercept. Her firm's most recent FARA disclosure shows that it was on the UAE's payroll through the end of September. Otaiba and the Harbour Group also did not respond to requests for comment. In recent years, the Gulf monarchies have recruited a small army of lobbyists and communications consultants in Washington, in part to defend the Yemen war. In May, The Intercept reported that Saudi Arabia had spent more than twice as much on lobbying as Google and had 145 individuals registered as foreign agents on retainer. The UAE has a much smaller footprint but is equally effective, giving massive donations to both liberal and conservative think tanks, and even footing the lobbying bills for other dictatorship like Egypt. Top photo: Samantha Power and Hagar Chemly briefed journalists at UN headquarters in 2015.